Well, good morning, everybody. We will call the special work session to order for July 28th, 2020. As you can see, we are meeting again through Zoom. I have to read this disclosure before we start the meeting. To ensure public safety and comply with the governor's Safer at Home order in response to the COVID-19 virus, the Clearwater City Council will hold a public meeting on Tuesday, July 28th, 2020 at 9 a.m. using communications media technology. Pursuant to Executive Order number 20-69 issued by the Office of Governor Ron DeSantis on March 20th, 2020, municipalities may conduct meetings of their governing boards without having a quorum of its members present physically or at any specific location and utilizing communications media technologies such as telephonic or video conferencing as provided by Section 120.545B2 Florida statutes. The meeting will be held through the Zoom platform and will be broadcast live on the city's website, https://www.myclearwater.com/government/council-meeting-streaming-videos. On Facebook, www.facebook.com/City of Clearwater, and on YouTube, www.youtube.com/myclearwater, as well as the following public access TV channels: Spectrum Channel 638, Frontier Channel 30, and WOW Channel 15. Individuals with disabilities who need reasonable accommodations to effectively participate in this meeting are asked to contact the city clerk at 727-562-4092 or rosemary.call@myclearwater.com in advance. With that, I will turn it over to the city manager for item 2.1.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor, Council. Let me just say on behalf of the staff, I want to thank the council for your patience and support during this budget cycle in the middle of a pandemic. You all have been very supportive and very patient as we have tried to work through some unknowns, and some unknowns still exist. But I just want to thank you. We have answered your questions. We also will continue to answer your questions as they evolve as we get through this process. We have two items for you this morning. The mayor indicated 2.1, which is budgetary impact of police body camera program, and then we want to discuss the Penny for Pinellas project list. So Kayleen Castle is going to present both items. It looks like Dan may want to present that item. I don't know, but I know Kayleen is supposed to present the item. So Dan, are you presenting it, Chief Slaughter?
Sir, I was going to start it off, but certainly turn it over to Kayleen.
Okay, go right ahead.
Allocation. I just wanted to, update council that on July 26th, they requested that we provide this budget item, kind of by defining the budgetary impact and potential funding sources to cover a body camera program. We made some adjustments to the initial presentation that was provided to council during the last council meeting regarding body camera expenses. We had originally proposed adding a police sergeant to conduct audits and to monitor the program. We have looked internally and found a position, a corporate position that we would upgrade, therefore providing $95,000 of savings with regard to the operating costs. Furthermore, there was an attachment with the agenda item that provided a list of items that could be funded through different sources, and in the end, we're able to pay for many of the expenses through the general fund and blending some general fund reserves. The actual capital outlay of the program was going to be covered by the federal forfeiture program, so therefore we were more focused on the long-term reoccurring costs. And be more than happy to turn it over to Kayleen at that point if there's any questions about the proposed funding of the program.
Any questions at this time? All right, Chief, don't go too far.
Sure.
podium in the chambers is muted.
Good morning, Council, Mayor and Council. Kayleen Castle, Budget Manager. The schedule that was attached just outlined some savings that we found in the proposed budget, some that will be reducing before you adopt in September, and others just identify one-time costs in next year's budget that will help offset future year costs. So if you have any questions about that schedule, I could answer. I'll be happy to answer.
Kayleen, why don't you just walk through that handout?
Okay, sure. So the first thing that we're looking at is excess ad valorem revenue. And I spoke to that last month in the budget presentation, how our preliminary values were a little lower than what we were showing in the budget versus our final values that we'll be adopting in September. So that was an additional $105,000 of revenues that will offset this increase. North Greenwood CRA was budgeted in the Economic Development Department. It was a one-time cost for a study that was planned next year, and we're not sure if that will happen, or and even if it does, it's only one time. So that's going to come out in the 22 budget to offset $50,000 of the cost for the CAMs in 22. The $95,000 is the reassignment of the police is upgrading 2 positions. The net increase of that is $95,000. Right? Is that right?
I don't know why.
I'm not exactly sure what I think that.
The $95,000 is the reassignment of the position that the chief mentioned in his part of the presentation, but I'll turn it back over to him.
Yeah, Jim, if we can put the Elmo on too. I'll just walk through one of these each one. I'm sorry for the confusion, sir. Kayleen, I kind of launched it on her. I apologize for that. So going down line by line, the $95,000 is the actual savings we achieved by not creating a new position, but by upgrading a corporal position. So therefore, the increase of the personnel cost is only going to be approximately $25,000, as opposed to the original estimate of $120,000. The AEDs are items that are going to be potentially transferred to, those costs would be absorbed by the central insurance fund as opposed to the general fund. The sports facility advisory audit of $30,000 is going to be a one-time expense that would be from the reserves related to the Spectrum renovations project. $40,000 is funds that were not allocated and available for repurpose. The Metro request is a software project that we build, that Mr. Maxwell believes he can build into the consulting contract. The interlocal agreement with the Pinellas FSBDC is another item that is kind of unknown due to the impact of COVID and the disruption of COVID, and potentially available for reassignment. Of course, the COVID has had an impact on how Coachman Park and special events are managed. So therefore, there's $23,000 of funds that may be available with whatever our new image of special events is, and as well as the current plans for Coachman Park and how that will impact our ability to host events. The fire tower is another line item that will potentially be, that we're proposing could be in the capital improvement budget as opposed to the general fund. And the accreditation expense, similar to some of the other items, the CRA and the sports facility audit, are ones that are one-time events that staff is recommending that those move into reserves, thereby freeing up the general fund. When you add all these together, the amount of reserves that is necessary to fund the operating budget of the police body camera, but also taking into account the funds that would be necessary to cover these new reserve allocations, would be $180,000, $837. And hopefully that kind of walks the council through it.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, Dan, you know, my concern with this all along was budgetary. You know, taking $800,000 out of our budget, I just had an issue with that, knowing that we really don't know what next year is going to bring with the COVID this year. I mean, it's a concern, but I'm glad to see we've gone through different departments and we've pulled out some monies that we can use toward it. I guess this would be more of a Kayleen question, but what is the percentage of our reserves now with the $180,000 or $181,000? Are we still safe on that? Are we?
Yes, we're confident in our reserve balance. Going into next year, I don't have my third quarter report in front of me, but I believe that we are 14% above minimum reserve, about $25 million above that 8.5 excess.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Councilmember Beckman. You're muted.
I have just some questions about some of the phrasing where when Chief Slaughter went through things and said, you know, FSBDC unknown due to impact of COVID, potentially available for reassignment, may be available. And so there are some of these mays that are unknown, and I know we're in, you know, unknown territory, but does that mean that there's the potential that funds will be coming from other places that they were allocated? And then just as a side note, because I am new, FSBDC interlocal, I mean, I don't have a firm grasp on what that stands for or what that is. I know there's a little bit of an explanation over here under description, but.
The item is, if I remember correctly, Florida Small Business. DC escapes me at the moment, but it is through the county. It is a county program that provides programming to Spark partners.
Okay, I know what Spark is.
Ms. Sanderson is here to speak a little deeper to that item. But
Thank you, Denise Sanderson, Director of Economic Development and Housing. Florida Small Business Development Center at Pinellas County Economic Development is what that is referring to. We have a $30,000 annual interlocal agreement to provide support services in the Clearwater marketplace from that organization. What is unknown about that relationship for this next fiscal year is simply the impact that COVID will have in their ability to meet clients in a face-to-face setting, which is what they do now. We anticipate that FSBDC may receive some funding from other sources related to CARES Act and related. And so the support that the city provides that organization may in fact not be necessary, if you will.
But if it is, I mean, you've kind of got it potentially earmarked to remove 30,000 from that program.
That's
correct.
Yes, and as I shared with Mr. Maxwell when he and I spoke of this last week, I'm confident that we'll be able to continue to deliver services through the Spark network. Florida Small Business Development Center is a part of that network and will continue to provide services. What's in question is whether or not they'll be able to deliver those services directly in market. But as things have gone virtual for most of us, as you know, I'm confident that they'll be able to continue to engage clients.
Okay, but with potentially $30,000 less from us to help them do that.
That's correct.
Okay, and then I have a question you might about the North Greenwood CRA. So there's $50,000 set aside for a study related to that for next year, but we're taking that $50,000 away for a potential study next year.
We earmarked those funds for fiscal year 2021 in anticipation of developing a CRA plan. Whether that plan comes out of our office or one of the other departments is unknown. We have reached out to the county to see if they can contribute to the funding of such a plan, since this is driven largely by County Commissioner Ken Welch to develop this. We're hoping that they'll be able to step up with some funds, and we have that ask outstanding.
But if they're not, you know, if they're not, and we.
This would be to Dan. You said that you gave us at the last meeting the amount of almost 800,000 for the cameras, but then as we discussed things, you said that there may be some additional costs because of uniform changes. Was that taken account in this budget? Or is that going to be something that you don't know about and will have to come back later?
No, I believe, so this kind of really does focus on the reoccurring costs, but some of those additional expenses that get you to that 800,000, 769,000 number, that or 707 number we had before, was the equipment, $177,000 we were going to spend for the body cameras and the equipment itself. And then we estimated about $50,000 for the uniform adjustment. We believe that, you know, we can actually deal with that internally with our funds that we currently have and make that happen. So we were more focused for this particular financing on the budgetary impact on the reoccurring costs. We believe we have the capital outlay kind of covered.
For the initial?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Yeah, Kayleen, I'm not going to hold you to the penny, but can you give those reserve numbers again, what our minimum reserve requirement is and how much money is in the reserve account presently?
Sure.
Ballpark numbers are fine.
Okay. I don't have the exact amount of what the 8.5 reserve is. Our council policy requires us to set apart 8.5% for the current year's budget for future expenses. That's approximately 12.9 million. After we fund the reserves that are needed for the body cam project, we'll have 25 million in excess of that 8.5%, which is 16.4% of the current year's budget.
Okay, so it's not like we're draining our reserves. Even if we paid for this entire thing out of reserves, it's not like we're draining our reserves down to where we're going to be scraping the barrel and being very close to operating, well, which we're not allowed to do, but operating in the red, correct?
Correct.
We've got a very healthy reserve balance. So this is just a little bit more creative way to take the minimum amount out of reserves and still fund the project, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Beckman.
If I appreciate that question from Mr. Hamilton, and I was impressed with the amount of money that we have in the reserves and the percentage above the minimum requirement. But if Kayleen, for our edification and residents, could talk about what types of expenses we save the reserves for. What are the reserve funds for? Is it hurricane? Is it, just so that we can be clear on what they're there for?
I would say it's a combination. I mean, being a coastal town in Florida, we need to have reserves available for emergencies like hurricane. But this year is a unique emergency that was presented to us that nobody really saw coming. And reserves possibly could be used to balance the budget at the end of fiscal year 21. So we don't use reserves to pay for ongoing operating needs. We sometimes allocate them in the budget for one-time capital projects. But really you wouldn't use them for anything ongoing. And it's for emergencies, for the unseen.
Well, when you say one-time capital projects, would we use any of the reserve funds for Imagine Clearwater?
You could. In the current budget, we, well, I guess it really wasn't reserves. It was revenues, excess general fund revenues we transferred over. So, I mean, you could. That would be a decision that you would have to make.
It's ultimately up to the council, but what we've always done is when unexpected expenses have arisen, literally that are normally one time, then we use reserves. But if we are going to add, say, 5 employees that are going to be ongoing to any general fund department, we would not continue to pay for those 5 employees year after year after year through reserves. Although in 2009-10 timeframe, we did use some reserves rather than raising millage because we did not think that the Great Recession was going to last forever, just as hopefully COVID-19 doesn't last forever either. Hopefully that helps citizens understand how the budgeting process works. Other questions? Okay. Then we can move on to item 2.2. You are muted, Mr. Horn.
Mayor, we will have an agenda item in the next work session, council meeting related to this item for you all to decide whether you're going to fund the cameras or not.
Yes, sir.
All right, 2.2, we're now going to discuss Penny for Pinellas, and Ms. Castle, go right ahead.
So for the benefit of our new council members, Penny for Pinellas is the voter-approved additional 1 cent sales surtax, which is restricted to fund long-term capital infrastructure projects as well as public safety vehicles. Pinellas County voters originally approved this surtax in 1989 for 10 years. Extensions were approved by voters in 1997 and 2007, and we are currently in the fourth 10-year cycle, which voters approved in 2017. So penny revenues, like others based upon sales tax, are showing impacts due to COVID-19. In the schedule that we'll be discussing today, I've made some changes to revenue projections in comparison to the file that was approved last year. For fiscal year 21 revenues, I've reduced based upon receipts to date and projecting the remaining months of the year at a decrease of what was originally projected. Fiscal year 21 revenues are projected at an 8% decrease in comparison to the original file. And fiscal year 22 forward begin escalating at 2.5% annually. These changes create a $7.1 million deficit over the remainder of the 10-year cycle. With this source, unlike the operating budget, we can take a long-term approach in addressing the project changes. So with this long-term look, we're not recommending to make cuts now to the project list. We can wait a little longer to see if these revenue projections, turn out to be, the actual is the same. It could be better, could be worse. So we don't feel like it's important to make those cuts right now. This will also allow time for the council to work through changes in the strategic direction that you might want to make changes to this project list. City ordinance requires us to hold a public hearing prior to the adoption of the capital improvement budget to discuss the use of Penny for Pinellas tax. And at any time, there's a proposed change to the Penny for Pinellas project funding of $500,000 or more. This annual hearing is scheduled for September 3rd. And today we're seeking your input on this project list and the proposed changes so we can prepare the advertising requirements for that meeting. The proposed budget included timeline changes to 2 projects, no changes to overall project funding. In the fire engines ladder truck replacement project, the replacement schedule for fire trucks is being changed to advance the planned engine replacement from fiscal year 22 to 21. This results in replacing 2 engines next year. And the public safety vehicle equipment facility project is being postponed to fiscal year 22. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on this draft list.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. Just so people understand, this time every year during budget is when we look at our Penny for Pinellas list and how it lays out. But that does not prohibit us from looking at it at any time during the year as we move forward, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So this is not our only opportunity to look at this. We can look at this multiple times as the economic conditions change and we get a better feel for everything. So keep that in mind as we have our discussion, I would say.
As we go through and revenues diminish, I mean, this is a very fluid, dynamic document where I think we triage and prioritize what is most important, and money does shift around over time. And you have to harken back again to the Great Recession where we really shifted things around. I would also point out one other thing. Over time, when Penny first started, most of the money was allocated to building new facilities. As times have changed, we've really started to shift money for Penny to replace infrastructure that is getting old, and rather than paying through either enterprise funds or the general fund through ad valorem taxes, we've kind of used penny to replace, for instance, fire stations or make improvements or replace libraries, major work on recreation centers, rather than building new facilities that then require us to have additional FTEs and operating funds. So that's just one other thing I'd point out that's evolved over time. Councilmember Beckman?
I would think, Kayleen, you know, when we talk about our penny revenues are down because of, you know, a lockdown from March, you know, April, May, June, and then, you know, we do see less economic activity because of COVID. And you said, you know, we'll have to see how much it comes back or whatever. I mean, don't we think that that money's not recoverable? We're not going to come back with some great big wave of economic engagement that's going to make up for 4 months of really impacted revenue, right?
It's not likely. At some point, I do think we will have to shave off this total amount. And it's also going forward, you know, how long it lingers, the effects on travel, things of that nature. So I think we're going to have to shave at some point. Absolutely. It's just what amount, and, you know, we can maybe wait and see, get a little clearer picture to know how much we have to cut.
Although I will say from an economic standpoint, there are certain industries that people will forego spending today. It will create a lot of pent up demand. And then you will actually see spikes in spending, and you can make up a fairly significant amount of penny dollars. That does not always happen, but just putting on my economics hat, that really does happen in many instances. You saw that, for just as an example, again, during the Great Recession, you saw car sales diminish pretty significantly. And we all remember how GM got money, and so did Chrysler, Jeep. And then after we came out of the recession, demand for automobiles went up to all-time highs. And so that did in fact produce a lot more sales tax revenue than you would see. So it was very choppy as far as the way the revenues came in. But sometimes you will actually make it up. It wouldn't be made up in a 6-month period, but it may be made up over an 18-month period once we go back to some level of normalcy. I think it's very difficult to forecast, but it can happen. And that's why this is a 10-year program too. Other questions on the penny?
Well, are we going to be talking about each one of the penny funds that was part of the attachment? I mean, is this where you want some questions about some of this descriptions of changes in original funding versus current funding? Is now the time?
Yes,
or
we've
okay.
had shifts in some of the funds and some of them combined. So if you have questions about this, it's the appropriate time to ask.
Okay. Well, I have a concern about the Sand Key Bridge Replacement Fund, and the idea that, you know, staff has recommended that we set aside, what is it, $3 million annually for a potential $95 million replacement cost in 2045. And we seem to be taking a lot of money out of that fund because it's not needed right now, with the promise that we will, you know, replenish that. And I'm just very nervous about promises to replenish funds if we're going forward in, you know, uncharted territory economically. I think that it's prudent to put this aside and not take money out of this fund. Was I muted?
Councilmember,
Oh.
Councilmember Beckman, is there a question?
Well,
What's the question?
Well, our why aren't we fully funding this?
Well, the obvious reason that we're not funding it is because if you look at the chart, there are a lot of other priorities that are more pressing to us now, and we've given ourselves space to be able to meet those more current priorities, and also if being mindful that it is a budget estimate, and when we created Penny, we did our best to kind of estimate what that would be, just as we have done with all the other areas. But you live through Penny, you live through what your priorities are, you live through what your funding sources are to meet those needs when you really need to meet them. We can ask Tara Kivett, if she's in there, to kind of talk about how we're looking at the Sand Key bridge replacement. She's our city engineer.
Morning, Tara Kivett, city engineer. We're in process of evaluating and updating the cost estimate and the lifespan. We're guessing that 50 years is very conservative. Most likely it will be more in the 70 to 80 year range. And of course the cost will go up. So to Bill's point, we're assuming there's some time to
have we in the past taken funds that were allocated, monies that were allocated towards a specific fund, taken them out temporarily to cover a gap and then replenished? Do we have a good record of replenishing things that we shift around?
I don't know about replenish, but I think that priorities change. And so we've had shifts in the past, and some things have come back. Prime example is the City Hall project was completely removed out of Penny 3. It came back in Penny 4. So really a lot of it is just based on priority changes at the time and different needs that arise. I also would add that I don't believe that Sand Key would be fully funded by the city. I think there would be state, county dollars available too. So I don't think we would be, even if 95 million is the estimate, I don't think it would be all required from city funds.
Okay.
Councilmember Beckman, I would like to also point out that when the voters approve the Pennies list, we do our very best to maintain that list that has been approved by the voters. So to your earlier question, we don't just take those items and ignore them. I mean, we try to make sure that we preserve the funding necessary to accomplish them. And it's only when the council believes that there's a current situation that requires that those items not get funded at that level, or they even remove those items because there's no need for it. We generally will cover those items at some point during the penny cycle.
Other questions? Councilmember Beckman?
Yeah, I have questions about the Major League Baseball training facilities page, just page 3. So we've got in here that the total cost in fiscal year 2021 could be up to $40 million for all renovations, repairs, upgrades, and new development facilities. The city portion of the cost is estimated to be between $5 million and $7,500,000, with the Philadelphia Phillies, Pinellas County, and state of Florida picking up the remainder of the costs. I find that a little surprising. Will they really pick up the remainder of that 40 million, minus 12.5 million? Because in the past, they haven't contributed that percentage, that much of a percentage of the balance of the ask.
So what's the question again?
Do we really think that the city and state is going to pick up, 26 or whatever million dollars of that $40 million ask?
Councilmember Beckman, we are in the process of refining what we believe the contributions are going to be. And as I have told all of you in my one-on-one meetings, is that as soon as we have a revised, updated picture of what that looks like, we will bring that to you. So, but when this list was created and that write-up and that narrative was developed, that was the perspective at the time. But again, those things get updated as you start moving through the cycle.
And then along with that page, I just want to know, why do we, under the update section, why is the funding merged with funds from youth sports field renovations and the tennis complex? Why do we put those all together, you know, instead of keeping them separate?
What we've done with a couple of the parks projects in the past, and sports fields, and another one is neighborhood parks, is we budget in this plan in kind of like a bucket project. And then when we get to the point that we're ready to break out something, we typically create a new project and move funds out. And that's what we've done at least the last 10-year cycle. So we kind of look at this as like an umbrella project where we can group these similar, you know, for this, it's sports fields together, and the other one is neighborhood parks. And then, you know, when we get to that point, we typically break out and move funds into separate projects.
I just have some concern in me keeping track of things that are primarily for residents, and then things that are, you know, for this major baseball enterprise. Yeah.
And we have a separate project currently for Spectrum. And so once these agreements come to fruition, we will move the funds into the Spectrum Field project.
Okay. All right. And then I guess I just noted, since people don't have questions, on the Police District 3, the Countryside substation. So that's a big jump there from the original funding of $5 to $11 million for that substation, right? So that's going forward, which is fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say that this started in 2016, and it actually started much earlier than that, like 2012. And then there was a lot of changes and it kind of got bumped back. And so time has increased that, and possibly change in needs. And the chief's here, he can speak to that project.
Yeah, for a historical perspective, it's important to note that $5 million that you're referencing was more of a placeholder at the time. We hadn't necessarily defined exactly what the facility was going to be. The cost of the facility is going to be the current estimated of $12 million for the total project, because it is building a Cat 5 facility for hurricane protection. The police department does not have a Cat 5 facility, and we have about 200 employees that are here in the midst of a hurricane that we need to shelter. So the building, our main building that we currently have, is rated just under a Cat 3. So we have some certain needs out of this facility that we're seeking to accomplish through this project. But the original funding was really just a placeholder at the time.
Thank you. And then I had a question for Kayleen. It's for Kayleen. On the youth sports fields renovations, which is like page 9, and I know this is where you merged it with the, you know, ball complex, ball fields, professional Major League Baseball training facilities and sports fields and stuff. In the scope, you know, words like this project could provide for renovations and improvements for the Ross Norton ball fields, Frank Tack Park, Countryside Sports, all that stuff. This is where I just, you know, I hope that residents aren't short shrifted with merging these funds, and then, you know, funds go to a major facility and our neighborhood complexes that are identified here. If all the money gets put into one bucket, then if most of the money goes towards a professional sports facility, and then these neighborhood fields that are used by our residents aren't used as much. And then I guess along with that is the page on the Henry L. McMullen Tennis Complex expansion. And this was, it says the scope of this project was significantly reduced, and then funding was merged into that other fund, which, you know, we've established. But I have a question under the background. You're saying that this tennis complex hosts a bunch of USTA high school and professional tournaments. Does it generate a little bit of revenue for us by hosting those kinds of tournaments?
Art's going to speak to that, but I'll just,
Okay.
a little bit of the history on this. A few years ago, we kind of shifted our model to funding projects for, renovations and replacements of current facilities and trying to reduce expansion because of our budget growth and because of future operating expenditures. And the mayor touched on that earlier, kind of the evolution of the Penny project. And so that's why this one was drastically reduced. And I believe that there was an expansion a few years ago of a few fields, courts, I'm sorry, and Art will speak to that, but we already funded that a few years ago and kind of eliminated the need for this larger project in the Penny 4 cycle.
Good morning. Yes, absolutely. We did 4 new clay courts, which is part of this project. We did it early. We were able to do that from other funds. As far as the building goes, again, this was a bucket of money, and it was supposed to be a renovation of the clubhouse, which has been there for actually from the inception of McMullen Tennis Complex. So that's basically what it's for. Now, we've moved that money out, which means obviously at some point in time, at this point, we're not planning on building that facility, to be quite honest with you, not unless we get funding later on or are able to transfer monies in to do that.
Do we
Mr.
host a lot
Cater,
of-
excuse me, Mr. Cater, you also go for state and county grants and monies from elsewhere, right?
We do. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of those have dried up. Now, back to your original question about revenue, we do bring in the tennis tournaments, at least we have in the past, and this was part of the sports tourism focus that we have. And the new facility would have allowed us to basically bring in some of the college tournaments and other pro and semi-pro tournaments at the courts. And we do receive some revenue. It's not a whole lot, to be honest with you, but there is some revenue involved in it.
But there are additional benefits when you bring in tournaments and things, right? For our economy, people stay in hotels and eat at our restaurants. So it's a good investment, I think, to improve these facilities.
Absolutely.
Well, there are tournaments that also come in from Spectrum Field.
Mhm.
We had the ACC coming in for a very long time frame with baseball tournaments, and use the Carpenter Complex and other areas. That all goes to bed tax. We get a portion of that bed tax, and also other capital money. I think Penny, one of the things we have to remember, it was going to be a comment I was going to make in a minute, and Councilmember Hamilton, I see us, so I'm coming to you next. But people have to understand that a lot of the Penny for Pinellas dollars are generated by tourists. And so when we can do things that benefit our residents with money that has been generated by our guests, that's a really great way to leverage things. I mean, one of the first things in the Penny list is the utilities infrastructure. Now that normally would be paid for, through the fees that are paid through our water and sewer, but there's money that's actually coming from Penny that reduces the direct cost to our citizens. And a large portion of that bill is being paid for by tourists. Did you have anything else to add, Art?
No.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember Beckman?
It did, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Hamilton, you had a question or comment?
Well, I think it was more along the lines of what you already said. The ESPN, the women's softball tournament that we have at Eddie Moore, we had last year with ESPN televising. That's exposure and taglines in the press that say Clearwater that you can't buy. You can't put a price on that. The exposure that gives us, and as you said, 1 out of every $3 spent in Pinellas County and in the state of Florida is spent by a tourist. So, these are all revenues that our local citizens benefit from, because we're generating revenue, or it's revenues being generated by the tourist economy that we don't have to supplement with local money. So, that's something to keep in mind. Every time that little hashtag appears in the press, Clearwater, Florida, that's marketing for our destination. And it's important to keep getting that type of recognition.
I'm going to ask a couple questions. Back to the youth sports fields renovations, in the very last sentence of the scope, it talks about Safety Harbor, and this is probably a Mr. Cater question. Safety Harbor residents as well as North County residents would use these new facilities, and we partner with Pinellas County. At one time, we partnered with Safety Harbor on the Long Center, and they pulled out of that partnership. How are we actually getting direct participation in these ball fields that are servicing some of the residents of Safety Harbor and unincorporated Pinellas County?
It's a really good question. And actually, Safety Harbor has stepped to the plate we now have an agreement with them where they
No
pay.
pun intended.
No pun intended, right. Safety Harbor, we have an agreement with them. They pay the city of Clearwater $50,000 a year, up to $350,000 a year for the renovations that we have made at the Countryside Sportsplex that we're currently doing. So in doing so, they have partnered with us to make the facilities in Clearwater and also for their Safety Harbor residents much better and in being able to play their sports at that complex. So that to this point has been what they've done. They've come to the plate on that. And we believe that in the future, if we need to construct additional fields, that they will be our partner in that as well.
Okay. And then I don't know if Mr. Chesney is around, but I had a question about the beach marina upgrades, because this is my first shot at this particular penny list. Or Mr. Horn, maybe you can answer this, but in the beach marina upgrades, talks about the 180 boat slips. Is there any additional, I know that the design out at the beach marina, because it's been, again, looked at over decades, was not the most efficient. Is this going to actually add capacity through gained efficiencies, Mr. Chesney?
Yeah, Ed Chesney, Marine and Aviation. That is our plan. The marina has grown probably 3 times. We just kept adding on to it, so there's a lot of wasted space. And we also have not used our entire footprint out there. So we have surveyed what the city technically owns as bottomlands, and we can push the marina more to the south and use a lot of the dead space where we have slips out there, say for our fishing charters that are too big. The slips are much larger than the charter needs. They've been leasing those areas for many years. So you might have a 6-pack slip that is, X amount of dollars, and you have another 6-pack slip paying the same fee, but has double the space. So when we redesign the marina, we're going to design the slips to suit the boats that we're using them for, and maybe get a slip here, a slip there, adding slips. So yes, we are planning on adding significantly, if we can, to the total number of slips.
Okay. And then there was under recreation trails, there was talk about giving access to Lake Chautauqua Park. And have there been complaints from the folks around Landmark Drive? It talks about allowing residents from South Clearwater to access Lake Chautauqua without utilizing Landmark. How is that going to occur, Mr. Cater?
Basically what the idea is, we're working with the Boy Scouts and have for many years. There's actually just a very small piece of property that we need, a little right of way that would connect it up with Sewell Road. That we've got everything else. We don't plan to put any additional trails, but it's just a very small connection there.
So in conjunction with Camp Sewell.
That is correct. It is the Boy Scouts. We do not own the property as of yet, but we would hope to do that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Other questions? Councilmember Beckman?
I just wanted to make a mention that we could be using some penny money for clean energy investments that would save us money in the long run. And when you allocate some funds, for example, for solar panels, and you spend $1 million, next year, over the course of its lifetime, you could save, up to $4 million or whatever the financials work out. And I think by looking that way at allocating some of our funds that way, we get more back. You get more bang for your buck if you can look into how can I make this money, make more money for me, save money for me that I can use in other areas of the city. So I hope that, going forward, we can start to look at that possibility. I know Seminole had used penny funds to put solar on some of their city buildings, and it made financial sense because they gained more money than the initial penny funds that came in. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then also on page 4 that just talks specifically about Imagine Clearwater. And so when residents look at this attachment on the agenda and they see original funding at $8 million and we've got current funding at 14.5, if there can just be an explanation about what this, I know we've got the scope, but if somebody just wants to explain that big jump, that would be great.
Are you talking verbally? I mean, that's for the additional amphitheater expenses.
Right. Okay. So all that extra goes to just for the amphitheater?
The 8 million was just kind of the placeholder when we created the list. We created this list in 2017. This is when it was advertised before the vote. So it just started at 8,000 as a placeholder, and the project is much larger, and we know that we need more fundings than that 8 million and whatever we'd already identified. So in I think it was in 2019, we eliminated the downtown parking garage from the penny list because of enough revenues in the parking fund to fund that, and we just shifted those funds into Imagine because we knew we needed more funding there.
So these funds will use to get things going, to dig in the ground and start laying the infrastructure and the replanning of the park section and all that, correct?
Yeah, construction of the park.
It has to be capital expenditures. It can't be for the planning portion.
Okay. And this is just for 1 year, for 2021. That's what it is.
What is?
The 14.5 that we'll be using this for the next working year.
No, that's the total over the 10-year cycle. We put 4 million in 2020, 4 million in 2021, and that additional really isn't available until that additional isn't available until most likely until fiscal year 27. So if needed earlier, we would fund with another source and pay it back when available in the penny cycle. We also had $5 million in penny 3 that's currently in the Imagine Clearwater project. So that's part of the existing funds available.
So additional funding is not available until 2027. If we need it earlier for the Imagine Clearwater construction, it'll be funded from another source.
Yeah, we'll advance fund and pay back a loan basically when penny is available.
Sometimes we'll borrow from the central insurance fund or some other reserve that already exists.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Other questions, comments?
Mayor, I do have a question for Councilmember Beckman. Councilmember Beckman, relative to your comment about Seminole, you were saying that they made some investments. Were you referring to their use of their penny, or they just use it out of their general revenue?
I think it was their penny funds that they used it for, or
Okay.
it came from their penny funds.
All right. Mayor, if I could just make one other comment, it has to do with your comments regarding the utilities infrastructure, which was very helpful. When the county experienced Irma and there was significant sewer overflows, in the water bodies around St. Petersburg, we had some overflows ourselves, and the Stormwater Task Force was created. It was the first time that the county expressed a strong request for some of the penny funds to be used to address, what they had kind of identified, the task force identified as the cost for addressing a lot of those stormwater needs. And so that's how that is reflected in our pennies list. As penny goes forward, my sense is that there will still be that requirement for us to find ways of utilizing some of the penny dollars to address the stormwater needs, because those needs will be with us for quite a long time.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions or comments on Penny? And yes, Councilmember Beckman.
I appreciate that, Mr. Horn, because I was on that meeting from the county specifically about stormwater and the need to invest in infrastructure to prevent those events from happening. And it's a very significant need. Is that's not articulated and pulled out just for stormwater on our working draft, is it? I mean, does it just fall into public safety is it just replacement upgrade of current infrastructure? Is that where that would fall under? Because I don't see it articulated as a special stormwater or anything like that, right?
Is Mr. Porter in there?
It's utilities infrastructure. And it's really more utilities than stormwater. I believe it's related to storms and
Okay.
like overflows from storms, but not really stormwater utility. It's public utilities. It's water sewer is what that is really.
Okay.
Hey, good morning, David Porter, Public Utilities Director. Yes, the funding for these projects was targeted at the infrastructure required to minimize sanitary sewer overflows and other infrastructure issues with the wastewater collection system. It's really not stormwater per se. So this was really the first year that we've had access to those funds in Penny Fort. And as you can see, what we've done the first year with it is to assist us in building a brand new force main from lift station 45 on Sand Key to the connection point with the mainland. That was a very important project. It's something that absolutely needed to get done. There had been 4 major breaks in that line that created substantial SSOs over the years. And that was the first project we completed with our portion of the money. So those are the types of projects that we're targeting with the Penny Fort money going forward.
Hey, David, where does it fall on this document? You know, the one that's got the colored line items? Which one is it? Is it utilities infrastructure?
Yes.
Or it's
Yes.
the very first one up there?
Yeah, utilities infrastructure.
Okay, so none of the bottom ones, those last 3, it's just that one at the top.
No, so far, it's phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. All 4 of those will be undertaken at some point during the 10-year cycle for Penny
Okay.
Fort. So the priorities are to start with phase 1, which is on the beach side, because that's where some of our larger issues are as far as stormwater, dealing with SSOs. And so the first project that I spoke about was located there in phase 1. So this year we're going to continue some additional phase 1 work, some manhole relining and things of that nature. But we'll also probably get started on some of the phase 2 work for the Marshall Street Basin. So over the 10-year period, we hope to go through all 4 phases with the funding that we're being allocated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Anything else from the council on the Penny? Mr. Horn, anything else?
No, Mayor, nothing else.
Ms. Aiken? Okay. Any other new business from the council? Any other comments from council members? Councilmember Hamilton.
Well, I think, back to Councilmember Beckman's last question about the thing about stormwater and infrastructure. I know I think I don't know if she's aware, but, Frank, I'm trying to remember if you were on the council at the time. I know I was in the early 2000s, is when we actually, as a city, we took a hard bite. We bit the bullet hard, and we put an increase. We increased the fees and for stormwater for the residents, but we did it so that we could address our needs at that time. And we established through the city manager a 10-year rolling program, so that when we have bad storms, not hurricanes, obviously, but normal heavy thunder showers in the summertime, like we're accustomed to, and other type of events, our roads do not flood in most cases, unless there's we've had a couple of minor, or we've had a pump breakdown or something.
Yeah.
And obviously out on the beach, every once in a while, if you get a heavy rain at just the wrong time when you're at a high tide, general physics says there's nowhere for the water to go. But we've done that. We see every day streets in Tampa and St. Pete having roads flooding because they have not addressed their infrastructure needs for decades. But, we've done the right thing, and, we're good for it. And this money is just money, the number we've got in the penny for these infrastructure needs are minimal compared to what these other cities are facing right now. And I think the residents of Clearwater need to understand that too.
No, I was around because there was a lot of screaming about it when those stormwater fees went up, and we were the highest in the county.
That was a painful vote.
A lot of the other cities have followed suit, and some of the projects that have come out of that are Glen Oaks Park, which really alleviated a lot of the flooding issues, Prospect Lake, and then also Kapok. Those are the three biggies that I think about when you talk about road flooding, and then also improving the water quality going into Stevenson's Creek and ultimately, Clearwater Bay.
Exactly.
So thanks for bringing that up, though. Councilmember Beckman?
I have a question about the bed tax. So it's my understanding that it's usually the first week of the month that you get numbers from previous months with a 2-month reporting gap. And I'm wondering if we have the numbers for bed tax from March and April. Did they come in like on July 8th? And
they've come down. I'm your representative on the TDC. They have drastically declined.
Do you have like a percentage or a number, or
60%?
Okay.
65. And it's not only occupancy rates that have come down, but it's also the average daily rate. So even if the occupancy has improved, which it did over certain weekends, the weekends haven't been bad, especially out on Clearwater Beach. But the price for the rooms has come down. And then the occupancy during the week is atrocious because it's more people coming for a weekend rather than coming for a week.
Right.
And the feeder markets aren't what they normally are. Our normal feeder markets are the Northeast and the Midwest. And now and this kind of harkens back to after 9/11. So after 9/11, people weren't flying as much. They were just kind of concerned about flying. And the market that we went after, and this happened after 08, 09 as well, we kind of, if you could swing an arc from Alabama through Atlanta and over to South Carolina, that was kind of the market area that we were drawing from because it was a drive market. rather than the Northeast, Midwest. And then in the summer, for some reason, the Germans, British, and Spanish like to come to Clearwater in the middle of summer. While the rest of us down here are trying to go somewhere cool, they like the heat. And obviously that's dried up too. And then there's not much business travel. And so the TDC has altered their budget drastically as far as advertising. And it also can have an impact on some of the capital projects.
Yep. So those numbers where you said decrease 60 to 65%, am I correct? It's goes just through April. We don't have numbers for May or June, obviously, right? It just through April?
I think we have the May numbers.
And they're about the same, or are they up just a little bit?
They ticked up slightly,
Mhm.
but they're still not wonderful. And when we went through our budget meetings, it is extraordinarily, I'll be right with you, Vice Mayor, it is extraordinarily difficult to forecast this. So we have slashed the budgets for the TDC this year. And so we're spending less on marketing, obviously, and we're also trying to target the marketing dollars that we do have, to the market that we think we can actually capture. One of the other places that TDC uses money is elite events. So that would be things like the Valspar tournament, the St. Pete Grand Prix, although they didn't get funded last year because they didn't want the strings attached to it. But those type of events, and a lot of those events are not going to go forward this year. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I'm just going to make a comment to Councilman Beckman. The May is generally an off month anyway. I mean, in good times. It's when kids come off of spring break, they're back in school, and then they're back, summer picks up again. But COVID's thrown up, well, you know what it's done. It's the whole thing is just screwy this year. And then Florida going back into these high numbers. I think what I saw is right after we opened the first time we opened, right after in May, I think the hotels got hit pretty hard. People are waiting, to come. Now people are kind of staying back because Florida leads, in the positivity results and everything. So I think I think this will come back. It'll come back pretty quick when people feel safe.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Well, I'm going to tell a quick story that I hope that I hope continues to hold true. When my dad bought the Palm Pavilion in 1964, the gentleman he bought it from told my dad at the closing, he said, "Let me tell you what you just bought. You bought a business that because of Clearwater Beach, in good times, you'll do very well. And in less than good times, you'll do better than most, because Clearwater is a destination. Clearwater is a location that when the economy says this isn't the year for that big vacation and that big travel budget, Florida is a great fallback, because some people, even though they can't take the big vacation, they want to go somewhere other than their own hometown. So Clearwater, I think that still holds true. When we get through this pandemic, because of the economic impact it's had on a lot of people, they're not going to want to go on that big trip. But Clearwater and our reputation as the #1 beach is going to help bring a lot of that back to us. And I think that will hold true, and I certainly hope it holds true. So,
Your lips to God's ears. Any other comments?
Mayor?
Yes.
I just want to point out that a lot of the discussion on this agenda item 2.2 is related to Penny, but this is also the opportunity to discuss the operating budget, the preliminary operating budget. So if there are any questions, now's the time to do that as well.
Okay. Other questions about the overall budget? Councilmember Beckman.
I'd just like to say I had about 8 pages, 8 pages of questions about the operating budget that Kayleen and our budget director sat down with me and clarified things. So I appreciate that from them very, very much. So I
But
don't have questions
it's a
today.
massive document.
It is, it's
And
huge.
there's a lot of moving parts.
Mhm.
And, you know, each of the directors, I think, do a marvelous job of preparing, especially in difficult times, what the budget will look like throughout the year. And, you know, as we've already gone through budget amendments with this new council, that will continue to happen. This is a dynamic document that things do change, and we make adjustments as necessary throughout the year based upon what we believe the revenues.
Together and work well together. I mean, just in the document the police, you know, Dan gave us today about the different departments pitching in and saying we can help with this. It's always been like that as far as back I can remember. So kudos to staff and on all the people that work with our city. They really work well together.
Well said. Anything else? Oh, yes, Councilmember Beckman.
Just one last thing. And I know we've talked about the police body cameras. I feel really comfortable with our discussion and the information about the cost and the recommendations and the presentation from our police chief. And we're going to be voting on it next Thursday. So August 6th, I believe, as far as on the budget. Is that correct, Ms. Aiken?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
correct.
Okay. And so if residents wanted to weigh in at all, I would just encourage them to contact us to weigh in. I just anticipate, you know, it's a big it's not, I don't think it's a huge budget item in the whole scheme of things, but it is a big philosophical statement that we're making as a city to have our police officers wearing body cams. Everyone who interacts with a police officer will, you know, potentially notice that and see it. And I just, you know, I'd feel comfortable if I can say, well, we had more than 5 residents contact us about, you know, their feelings about body cams. So I would invite residents to communicate with me at least and let me know your feelings.
Thank you. So we'll be talking about at the work session on the 3rd and then voting on the body cams along with the full agenda on the 6th. We do invite people, if they want to send emails in, they go to all of the council members. All the council members care what you have to say. I want to reiterate that. And we look forward to people joining us. You know, I am watching the numbers on a daily basis on COVID-19. I would just encourage people to continue to be courteous of one another and please wear masks. I think it is making an enormous difference. It is a small sacrifice to pay to keep you and others around you safe and to get us back to some level of normalcy so people can go back to work. Hopefully our kids can eventually go back to school. But I just continue to encourage that. Have a little bit of patience with those around you. There are different opinions on all of these issues. And so what you believe, somebody else may not share that belief, but let's all respect one another's opinions and safety. So with that, we are adjourned. We will reconvene on Monday for the work session. God bless.